Okay, so welcome to our fourth week of Theories of Personality. Today we're going to be talking about Alfred Adler and individual psychology. Alfred Adler is, his theories are quite a bit different than Freud's, but he's still considered a neo-Freudian. He's someone who came a little bit after Freud, lived around the same time as Freud, and there will be some similarities with his theory and Freud's, but not a whole bunch. I'll have to point out how it's a little bit similar. Okay, but it's because it's going to seem different, and it's a very interesting take on personality. It's a bit different and unique. So he didn't just copy Freud, but there are still a few things that I'll mention that are similar. Okay, so let's talk about Alfred Adler's theory. Here's the thing about Alfred Adler's theory. The big thing about his theory has to do with inferiority feelings. Inferiority feelings of inferiority basically are what drive our personality development. So inferiority feelings are basically just, it's kind of self-explanatory. They are feelings of inferiority. So ever-present feelings of inferiority that drive human behavior. According to Adler, when we're born, when we're young, we all feel inferior. There are things about ourselves that bother us. And these feelings of inferiority basically drive us to get better. They drive us to develop into the people who we become. So these feelings of inferiority are key here. They are central. We all have them, and they drive our personality development because we want to improve on ourselves. We want to compensate for these feelings of inferiority. So compensation, yes, we engage in compensation. So compensation is the motivation to overcome inferiority. It makes us strive for increasingly higher levels of development. So we're born, we're completely helpless. And according to Adler, we are aware of our inferiority. We are aware of this helplessness, and we strive to get better. We strive to develop aspects about ourselves, our behavior, basically to deal with that, to cope with that, okay? Development is driven by the need to overcome inferiority, according to Adler. The infant is aware of their helpless and dependent nature, right? He says that we're aware that we're helpless and dependent, that we can't talk and we can't walk and we can't really do much of anything. And according to Adler, this drives us to learn these things, to talk and to start walking and to start doing things for ourselves eventually. It drives our development, this lack, right? This feelings of inferiority. But it also drives our personality development in other ways. It drives us to become the people who we are, who we become later on. So as an example here, a poor person's sense of inferiority might drive him or her to become rich and powerful. So maybe you're born, into a family that is poor, and it really bothers you. You're aware of this, and it bothers you. And because of this, you strive to become successful. You work hard, you become this kind of person who's driven, and then later on, let's say if you succeed, you become rich, and maybe you become powerful. Why did you become that way? According to Adler, it's because you had this sense of inferiority, and it drove you to become the person who you became. It bothered you so much that you had to do something about it. Now, keep in mind that not everyone, people who grow up poor, not everyone is basically aware that they're poor. I basically grew up poor as well, and I didn't realize just how poor I was until I went to college. So that didn't really drive me so much because I wasn't too aware of it. I will tell you about what drove me in a moment, but yeah, I wasn't really too aware of it until I was already a grown-up. But yeah, when I went to college, I looked around and I saw how people were dressed and everything. And I remember one day in the bathroom, there was a full-length mirror there, and I looked at myself and I realized that compared to these people, I'm dressed in a bunch of rags. And then I realized, oh my God, I'm so poor. And then going back home during the holidays for the first time after that first semester, which wasn't during Thanksgiving, by the way, because I was too poor to go back during Thanksgiving, right? Because the plane ticket or whatever it was, $400, $500, was just too much for me or my family. So they told me, no, stay over there. We'll see you a few weeks after that. Went back during the holidays. And then I finally realized that, man, I live in a shack. My house is tiny. Right? After being out there among the big buildings, seeing the way people are and the way they're dressed, being among basically the privileged, because that's mostly who goes to, you know, these prestigious universities. I went to a very prestigious place, just so you know. And I didn't realize until then. So that didn't really drive my, my personality development. But something that did drive me is the fact that I am the youngest, and that I felt powerless when I was a kid. People didn't pay attention to me. I'm the youngest. People didn't believe me. I would say something and I would get ignored, or I would say something and they would say something like, ah, what do you know? You know, that kind of stuff, because I'm the youngest. And I didn't know anything, and it was assumed that I just didn't know anything, and, you know, and that just was not important. So that drove me actually to excel and develop in a certain way. So I worked hard. I mean, I did really well in school, and I went and, you know, kept going. I got a BA, and then I got a PhD. And now, as you guys know, now I'm a professor. Now I'm someone that people do have to listen to. Now I'm someone that is different. And according to Adler, is that sense of inferiority, that sense that nobody took me seriously, that nobody basically believed me, nobody cared about what I said because I was the youngest and was basically overlooked. You know, that's what drove me. And I think it makes some sense. Think about other people. Think about other people. Like, think about like a bodybuilder, right? Who's really into working out and, you know, having big muscles and all that stuff. What drove that person to become that way? And you'll hear a lot of stories about people like that, that when they were young, that they were skinny and weak, and that people pushed them around and beat them up and things like that. And that drove them basically to start working out and get stronger and be someone who can kick anybody's butt, basically. There's many examples of this, but I want you to think about your own life, right? You're older now. I mean, I'm not saying you're old, but you're older, and your personality is probably fully developed by now. I think your personality never stops developing, by the way, but a lot of people would say that you are who you are by this point. Think about what drove you. Now, don't say it now. I mean, we can talk about this later because I'm recording right now. Think about what drove you. What kind of feelings of inferiority did you have that really bothered you and that you sought to overcome? You know, I can give you another example of someone that I know that when she was a child, she was ignored and she felt like nobody cared about her or gave her much attention. You know, and that she felt like, you know, she said she felt like she was tossed around as a kid. Her mom was raising her for a while, then her dad, then her uncle, and she felt like she was tossed around. She didn't get a lot of attention. And now as an adult, what kind of person did she turn into? Well, you should see her now. She gets a lot of attention, this woman. She's about 5 years younger than me or something like that, but she dresses in very provocative ways. She's very attractive and alluring. She does a lot to keep herself very attractive, but she loves attention, you know, now. I mean, she goes out a lot. She always needs to be with someone. If somebody's too busy for her, you know, to go out with her, she'll call another friend, or she'll be with, she requires constant attention. She became this kind of person because she felt ignored as a kid. And now she's the kind of person who gets a lot of attention. She turns a lot of heads, basically. When she walks into the room, to the party, it's like, wow, look at her. You know, that's what she became. You know, she really worked on herself, and she is attractive and has made herself a lot more attractive than she normally would be. You know, and yeah, some of that involves some kind of surgery, which I'm not going to mention, but she's a very different person because of that now. Okay, she's the kind of person who gets a lot of attention. Let's keep going, because this stuff about inferiority is kind of is at the center of Adler's theory. So we will talk about it a lot, but I gave you several examples there as to how this works. Can develop what's called an inferiority complex, right? It's a condition when the person is unable to compensate. They're unable to cope, you know, for those feelings of inferiority. So people who have an inferiority complex tend to have a poor opinion of themselves. They're unable to cope. So maybe they're miserable and poor, and they're not able to compensate or overcome that or cope. And because of that, they have very low self-esteem. They feel they're worthless, that, you know, that their life is miserable and they don't matter. That's an inferiority complex. In other words, they've given in to their condition, so to speak, and they feel inferior and helpless. And they're just stuck in that sense of inferiority. They weren't able to compensate and develop, the way they should have, because instead they developed a complex. Now, there's different ways in which this can develop according to Adler. You can have what's called organic inferiority, where there's something biologically wrong with you. Let's say you have maybe some defective part of the body. Maybe you're born and let's say your legs are defective and you can't walk. Or maybe you're born with a learning disability and you find it difficult to do well in school. Or maybe there's just something about you that looks different. Let's say that you're born with let's say an arm that's kind of smaller than the other, or one leg smaller than the other, something like that. Something where you feel that there's something defective about you biologically. If you develop an inferiority complex, you would let that thing that you feel is wrong with you to basically overpower you and make you stop trying. Like, let's say maybe you can't walk because you had some disease or some illness as a child, and you're like, oh, let's say your legs don't work. And because of that, you feel miserable and inferior, and you feel like you're not worth very much. So you don't try very hard in school. Let's say you don't try to make friends. So you're just miserable. And even as an adult, you're just there feeling miserable, sitting in your wheelchair and haven't made much of yourself. And you just feel like just awful and helpless and depressed. That would be an inferiority complex that basically overpowered you. Just because your legs don't work doesn't mean your mind doesn't work. It doesn't mean you can't do well in school. It doesn't mean you can't have friends, that you can't get married and do all those things. But you can let that overpower you and let it basically ruin your chances. Or maybe you have a learning disability. It's very hard for you to do well in school, so you stop trying. And because of that, you don't amount to much. Let's say you don't do much with your life. That would also be organic inferiority. Even if you do have a learning disability, it just means maybe you learn differently, or you require certain types of assistance to help you do better. And you could still become something, you could still do well in life. There's a lot of stories out there of people who were basically, had some problem and overcame that and still became great, successful people because of that. Believe it or not, supposedly Einstein was disabled, I don't know exactly how he was disabled, but early on, when he was in school, he was failing, and he wasn't paying attention. He might have been on the autism spectrum or something like that. But that would be organic inferiority. There's different things that could go wrong, Most people don't have organic inferiority. They may have something else, but there's some people, yes, it's something biological, something physical that makes them feel really miserable. And when they give in to that feeling of inferiority, they can't cope. So they basically have a very poor opinion of themselves, and they don't strive, they don't do much to improve their life. It could also be due to spoiling or pampering. So here's the thing. According to Adler, if you do too much for your child, you will actually impair their personality development. If the child's needs are always met, the child doesn't learn to have patience, okay? Doesn't learn how to overcome obstacles, doesn't learn to strive and to work hard. So they're likely to fail later on, right? Because later on, you're not always going to be there to do everything for them. So later on, when they're on their own, they're going to fail. They haven't learned to strive. They haven't learned to succeed. They haven't learned to try hard. So they're going to fail, and they're going to see that as a sign of their own weakness, of their own inferiority, and therefore develop an inferiority complex because you helped them too much. You didn't let them overcome on their own. You didn't let them learn to strive and learn to fail and get back up and keep going. If you help people too much, they will not learn to take care of themselves. You can keep people dependent if you do everything for them as a parent. You need to learn to let them go and let them learn to solve their own problems. You can help them, but don't help them too much. Don't pay all their credit cards, right? Don't always come to the rescue. Let them learn. Don't let them ruin and destroy their lives. I mean, if you need to help them, but you need to learn them, bounce back on their own and not do everything for them, because then they don't learn to strive. They don't learn to take care of themselves. And there are children who basically might develop an inferiority complex because of the opposite, because they are neglected. Neglected, unwanted children might blame themselves and see themselves as hopeless. Maybe they're born poor, or they're neglected, they're abandoned or abused or something like that. And they might feel because of that, that they're worthless and that nobody wants them. And why should they even try, to do well in school or try to meet people or anything? And it's because of they're neglected, because they, when they needed people weren't there to help them and take care of them. And because of that, life has been very awful, very bad. And they think it will always be that way. They basically, they don't strive because they feel that they're worthless, because people made them feel that way. Okay, that's how you can develop an inferiority complex. Okay, when you cannot cope with your feelings of inferiority. We all had them, according to Adler. We might even still have them now, and we continue to strive. But that's what drives you, this inferiority feelings. And when they become too much, when they overpower you, and then you're basically don't strive, that's when you have an inferiority complex. Now, you might also develop what's called a superiority complex. A superiority complex is when you overcompensate for these normal feelings of inferiority. You overcompensate, you overdo it. So, maybe maybe you feel helpless and powerless, and you strive to become that person who's very powerful and rich, someone that no one will mess with. But you might overdo it. You might develop a superiority complex that now that, let's say that you are successful, that you feel like that no one should mess with you, no one should tell you what to do, and that you're the best at everything, and that people shouldn't question you, and you have a superiority complex. There are many people who have that, and I'll give you an example of someone who has that, and you can clearly see it. It's Donald Trump. Now, he wasn't compensating for being poor or anything like that. But if you know a little bit about Donald Trump and his family, basically, the father was successful and was quite a influential, powerful man, and I think he probably made his children feel like, that they need to that they need to strive and work hard and stuff, and that without money, without power, they're nothing. And yeah, they were living in his shadow, so to speak. So when they grew up, the children grew up and developed, and Donald Trump became one of those very successful individuals. But he's kind of overdone it, so to speak. He has a superiority complex, I would say. Inwardly self-satisfied. He's just superior. He doesn't need to show it, doesn't need to demonstrate it. He has said that he went to like one of the best business schools, but he doesn't want anybody to see his transcripts. And he has sued to keep that private. He said that he pays all the taxes as he's entitled to pay, but he won't let anybody see his tax returns. Now, it seems like I'm attacking Donald Trump here, but that's when somebody has a superiority complex. They claim all these things, but never want to demonstrate it or prove it. They just, they're just the smartest, the hardest working, the most successful, even good looking, and they don't need to prove it to you. They just are. That's a superiority complex. Now, it's not just Donald Trump. Many celebrities have that, especially people who have been very successful. Musicians, other people, and movie stars. Some of them, you can tell they have this superiority complex. They have to be treated in a special way. And they develop this because so many people love them and give them lots of attention and make lots of money, that it's hard for them not to basically turn into this very boastful, vain, basically narcissistic person. Someone who's narcissistic will have a superiority complex. Athletes sometimes, musicians, not all of them become that way, but many do. But, these people who have a superiority complex, they don't necessarily have to be rich and successful. Some of them may feel the need to work hard to become very successful, but there are some who basically say, I don't have to prove anything to you. I'm just awesome, and that's just the way it is, right? Those with this complex are vain, they're narcissistic, they're boastful. They brag, and they talk about how smart they are, how wonderful they are, or how good looking they are. And they may not necessarily be that smart or that good looking. They don't even have to be successful, and they just brag. They're self-centered, full of themselves, basically tend to denigrate others. That's a very important thing. They put other people down. Oh, look at how ugly he is, or how stupid he is, or look at how poor he is, things like that. And we know Donald Trump denigrates others. I mean, it seems like I'm picking on Donald Trump, but come on, he has this superiority complex. If people attack him, he attacks back, and he's vicious with what he says. He's very good at attacking others. But that's what happens when you become very successful and you become too full of yourself. You develop this superiority complex. It happens to many people, but you don't even have to be successful. You know, I have a brother. You know, what is he really? He just works for the district, you know, LAUSD. He used to be a teacher, but he's always had this superiority complex where he's the smartest, the best looking. And, you know, and you have to you know, what he says has to be what happens. And he has this superiority complex. You don't have to be super successful or even be that successful at all. Even as a gangster, you know, you can have a superiority complex. You know, like you're just awesome and powerful and nobody should mess with you. And if somebody messes with you, you're going to kill them. You're going to put them in their place. That's that superiority complex. You know, they overcompensated for those feelings of inferiority, so to speak. They overdid it. And now they're full of themselves. They attack others. They don't have to prove to you or show you that what they say is true. It just is that way. That's the superiority complex. That's when you overdo it. Let's talk more about this striving for superiority. We all do it according to Adler. Not all of us will become superior or necessarily develop a superiority complex, but we all have feelings of inferiority and we want to strive to get better. We want to strive for superiority. Strive to overcome this inferiority. So striving for superiority is the ultimate goal for which we strive, a drive for perfection oriented towards the future. So we want to get better, right? We want to overcome these feelings of inferiority. Maybe we want to be smarter, maybe richer, more successful, more powerful, or whatever it is. We all strive for superiority, okay? We strive to overcome these feelings of inferiority. This drive for perfection, this striving, basically is what makes us into the type of people we become. It's what leads to our personality, the personality that we develop. It's not always an attempt to be better than everyone. We don't have to be better than everyone, but we want to strive for superiority. We want to be better, you know, than we currently are. We want to get better. We want to be smarter, maybe richer or more successful, whatever. Not necessarily be better than everyone. When you want to be better than everyone, or you want to basically be the best, or you have an inflated opinion of yourself, you have a superiority complex. But when you just want to get better, you want things to get better, that's striving for superiority. And we all have that according to Adler, okay? Instincts, primal tendencies, biological things are insufficient according to Adler, okay? Striving for superiority is what explains our personality and behavior. Okay, so yeah, instinctively, we can be aggressive. Instinctively, we can be curious and want to be with people and things like that. We have biological urges and tendencies that do shape our development. But according to Adler, that is not enough to explain our personality. It is the striving to overcome our inferior condition that we have at the beginning that leads to our personality development. Okay, it's not just biological, it's also psychological. It's mostly the striving that turns us into the kind of people we become. It's this striving. It's not just biological. Biological tendencies are there and they do help, but it's us wanting to escape our condition. Fictional finalism is this idea that the goals that drive us are fictional, idealized forms of some final end. Let me explain this, okay? Especially when we're young, we strive, we want to get better. We want to be smarter, maybe we want to be better looking, maybe we want to be richer, or whatever is powerful, successful, maybe more muscular, whatever it is that's driving us. There is this fictional finalism. It's this idea that basically that these goals, these things to which we're striving to don't really exist. Guess what? You will never be smart enough. You'll never be rich enough, even if you get rich. You'll never be powerful enough, good looking enough. There is no perfection, but we have this idea that somehow we can get to perfection. We can get to some endpoint, and it does not exist. We keep wanting to improve, okay? It drives us, but there is no end. There is no point at which you can say, okay, I'm smart enough. You always feel like I could be smarter. You always feel like I could be richer. I could have more. You always feel like I could still be better looking. You might be really good looking, and maybe people think that you're wonderful and they're proposing to you all the time. They want you to marry them, or you get lots of attention, become a celebrity or something like that. But guess what? You are never satisfied. You always think that somehow you could be more appealing. You could be better. Even as you get older and you're getting less attractive, you want to keep getting better looking with surgery or whatever it is. So there's this, that's fictional finalism. It never ends, so to speak. That doesn't mean we don't stop striving, but it just means that we never get to that endpoint. We never get to that final idealized form. We never achieve perfection. There is no such thing. So this striving increases tension. It bothers us, right? That we're poor, or maybe, or that we're not smart enough, or that we don't have enough influence or power. It bothers us. And this basically creates energy that drives us, okay? It requires energy, basically, this striving. It requires effort. Striving for perfection works at both individual and societal levels. So at an individual level, maybe you want to get smarter, more influential, maybe richer, more powerful, whatever it is. So as an individual, this drives your personality development. But it also works at a societal level. As a society, we strive to get better. I mean, the founding fathers, in this country, they developed the Constitution and, all these other things. In trying to form a perfect society. But they knew that it wasn't perfect. And that's why, it's possible to introduce amendments into the Constitution to make changes and make certain things illegal or make other things legal. And it's supposed to be a living document where you allow things to change, allow for change and for things to get better. They knew that society isn't perfect and the problems were going to come up. And back then, several people, especially those that were doing very well, felt that it was a pretty good society. Things changed, and and we had a civil war and all kinds of things, and people are basically striving to make things better, maybe in one way, and other people are striving a different way, and there's a struggle basically. But this striving for perfection works at a societal level as well. People try to change society, people try to make it better. Collectively, as a group, as a society, we try to get better. We try to make it more fair for everyone, not just for rich people, right? Not just for white people. Now, of course, it's everybody. It's women, it's people of color and everything. It's gay people and transsexual people. And society is trying to get better. And we are a more tolerant society than we were hundreds of years ago. This striving works at societal level as well. There's people who say it's gotten worse and they want things to go back. But what they don't realize is that, yeah, it was better back then for certain people, not for everyone. As a society, we need to make sure it works for everyone. We'll never get there. We'll never have this utopia, this perfect society where no one is poor, where no one is treated unfairly, where no one is abused and where no one is homeless. We'll never have that. We'll never get there. But we can continue striving as a society, and people try to pull it in different directions, try to influence it. And that's part of what happens at both the individual and societal levels. We're always struggling and striving, and we want things to get better. And sometimes it gets better, and sometimes it stays the same for a while. Sometimes it gets worse and then gets better. It depends. Sometimes, yeah, we do take a step back every now and then so we can take a step forward. These are difficult times we're living in, but it is better than it was hundreds of years ago or even decades ago. For some people, things have gotten better. We are more tolerant now, okay? Less racist than we used to be. Okay, even though racism still exists, intolerance still exists, but it used to be worse. The problem has always been there, and we try to fix things, we try to work on things, and that's how we strive, okay, as a society, but also as individuals. Okay, let's keep going. There's something known as your style of life. The style of life is a unique pattern of characteristics, behaviors, habits by which we strive for our sense of superiority. So let me explain that. Okay, your style of life is like your personality. It's your pattern of how you strive. Okay, how you want to achieve success. Okay, it's your pattern basically. Think of it like your personality. That's your style of life. It's how you strive, how you deal with things, how you try to achieve superiority. Your style of life, okay, determines which aspects of the environment you attend to, which ones you ignore. Okay, it determines all those things. There's a lot of things in life that we ignore. They're just not important to us. So maybe your style of life is one where you're more individualistic. So you basically attend to a lot of things that have to do with yourself and how you can get better, but you ignore the plight of other people. Or maybe you have a style of life where you are more social and you're more cooperative and you're more what we call collectivist. Okay, I'm throwing some things here that are kind of cultural, right? But those people attend more to other people. They're more about the group, right? And they will attend to more of those things and less things that are individualistic, just to give you an example. But there could be many different aspects that our style of life determines, right? What we ignore, what we pay attention to, what we strive for, what doesn't matter to us, okay? Our style of life, according to Adler, is learned from our social interactions that we have early in life. It is set by age 4 or 5. Your style of life is set according to Adler. You learn it by how the interactions that you have, primarily with your mother, and how things went with her or with your caregivers. That's how you develop a style of life. That's how you develop your personality. By the way, that is very Freudian. That's what Freud said, that your personality is set early. The things that happen to you early determine your personality down the road. Adler is saying the same thing over here, except that he's calling it your style of life. The way you interact with people, your style, so to speak, your personality is shaped early on. And that's the same thing that Freud said. Your personality is shaped very early. Okay. I'll give you an example here. So neglected children might develop a style of life where they're driven by revenge and resenting other people's success, taking whatever they can when they can, because they were neglected. They learned early on by age 4 or 5 that they need to take whatever they can, that things aren't going to be given to them. So they develop that style of life. And now that's the way they are as adults. You got to take what you can, even if people don't want to give it to you. You know, that's a style of life. Other people, their style of life might be more about cooperation, or it might be more about working with others, being social, being extroverted. That's the style of life. It's your personality. It's how you approach life. Let's keep going. Let's talk about the creative power of the self. Okay, here's the thing. According to Adler, we're not necessarily at the mercy of our environment. He says we have the power to create ourselves and our personality, basically. He said we actively create our style of life. We determine our style of life, our personality, our character through how we choose to perceive our experiences. Just because things were bad for you doesn't mean you have to turn into someone who is, just driven by revenge or a criminal or something like that. You don't have to become that. You can choose something different. You have that creative power of the self. You can choose who you become to be by how you perceive things. If you perceive things as just being bad and it's a dog-eat-dog kind of world, then you might develop a very negative style of life, negative personality. But if you see it more like we need to help each other to survive, we need to rely on others, then you might develop a different style of life where you're more cooperative and more social. So we have genetics, we have experiences, they shape our lives, but they don't predetermine it. So yeah, we have biological tendencies. We have experiences, maybe poverty or maybe being neglected, or maybe the opposite, being spoiled and being born rich. Those things will affect our personality, but they don't have to determine it. Okay, they don't have to predetermine it. Just because you're born rich doesn't mean you're going to be a snob, or that you're going to be, driven by success or wanting to strive for, or wanting to be powerful or whatever it is, or you're going to step on people, or it doesn't determine that. Okay, they influence your personality, but they don't really determine that. We choose how we interpret our situation, our poverty, or our or whatever, our privilege, or our neglect, or as we choose how we interpret that, and in interpreting that will then determine our style of life. So our style of life is an active construction. It's something we create for ourselves. It's not necessarily shaped completely by our environment or by our biology. Those do have an influence, but we still have the ability basically to decide for ourselves. Not every person who's had a messed up life and had a bad life will become a bad person. Just like not everyone who's been spoiled and pampered and rich will become someone who's full of themselves, or will become someone who is just driven by money and power. Okay, and let's say we'll ignore those that are in need. Okay. Our style of life, however, does remain constant once it is created. Once it is formed, and according to Adler, remember, he said by age 4 and 5, it's fully formed. Once it is created, it will remain constant, and it will be your outlook on life and how you strive for things, how you deal with things. You learn it pretty early on, but it doesn't have to be shaped completely by your environment or your, or your biology. You have some free will there, you could say, to choose to interpret things in a certain way and therefore choose your style of life. Striving for superiority, perfection. Okay, so there's universal problems. There's problems that we all have according to Adler. He called them universal problems, and they can be grouped into 3 categories. There are problems that have to do with our behavior toward other people, how we get along with people. There are problems that have to do with occupation, okay, with our work. And there are problems that have to do with love and relationships and that kind of stuff. And by love, he meant, romantic love for the most part, because the behavior toward other people can also involve, relationships. So behavior toward others, occupation, and love, those are the 3 universal problems. By the way, just to give you a little bit more information about Freud, Freud believed that there's 2 kinds of problems that people have in their lives and 2 kinds of problems they need to solve. And for Freud, it was love and work. So it was occupation and love. For Adler, there's also our behavior toward other people. Behavior toward other people, occupation, which is work, and love. Those are the 3 things we have to face, that we have to deal with. Those are our universal problems. And according to Adler, there are basic styles of life. There are 4 styles for dealing with the above problems. There's 4 ways in which we can deal with those problems. We can become the dominant type, right? Where we develop this ruling attitude with little social awareness or regard for others. The dominant type. They'll do whatever they want, take whatever they can, aggressive. That's the kind they are. They're the dominant type. The worst kinds will be people who are sadists and who like hurting others, but it could also involve people who are delinquent, people who don't care, will do whatever they want, right? Or a sociopath, can be a really bad form. The worst part, one of the worst examples of that as well, someone who will basically kill people and dominate them and rule over them. Basically, do whatever they want with them and then kill them. Less extreme forms, according to Adler, include alcoholics. They will also have the dominant attitude. They'll do whatever they want and they'll drink and, or drug addicts drink and smoke and do whatever they want. This next example, suicide, that seems kind of counterintuitive. That doesn't seem like that would be the dominant type. Seems to me like those people who are committing suicide are trying to withdraw. But according to Adler, no, they are the dominant type as well. What they're doing is they're hurting others by attacking themselves, that they hurt themselves so they can hurt others. They're being dominant as well. I don't agree with that, but that's what Adler said. That's the dominant type. And just to bring it up again, yes, Donald Trump is the dominant type. Powerful, ruling attitude, little social awareness or regard for others. That's my opinion. There's other people who have a different opinion, but he definitely has the ruling attitude. Some of you may think that he actually cares for people and stuff like that. I do believe he can care for people, but not everyone. He cares for certain kinds of people, I would say, but he is definitely the dominant type. He is not, one of these other types, the dominant type. By the way, there can be a combination, just so you know. You can also be what's called the getting type. The getting type are those that receive satisfaction from others and become dependent on them. The people who are the type that just want things from people. This is the most common type according to Adler, right? This is how most of us are. We want things, right? We want a good job. We want better pay. We want someone to marry. We want a house. We want a car. And we become dependent on others to give us those things, right? So we can get a good job, so they can give us better pay, so we can buy those things, right? We want people to give us love and attention and all those things. That's what most of us are. We're the getting types. We just want and want and want. That's the more common type. Okay? And there's also the avoiding type. The avoiding type, well, they avoid people. They avoid difficulties and the possibility of failure by avoiding life. Those who would rather avoid problems, avoid difficulties, they withdraw from people to avoid difficulties, to avoid problems. So they're not necessarily dependent on other people. They're not the getting type. They're the type that avoids people and wants to be on their own. They don't want problems with people. They'd rather avoid people. They think it's better to stay away from people because people cannot be trusted. People can be mean and hurtful. and they've learned that people are best avoided, okay? And then we also have the socially useful type. The socially useful type is a healthy style of life. And the socially useful type is the person who has social interest, someone who has an interest in other people. They have that community feeling or an innate potential, according to Adler, to cooperate with others to achieve personal goals and societal goals. So the person who is the socially useful type is the type that that helps others, okay? The type that cares about the community. They care about other people. They want to cooperate with others, work with other people, not just compete with them, not necessarily compete with them and step on people on their way up. That would be the dominant type. They want to help others. They want to get better as a community and help other people. That's the socially useful type. You know, they're more likely to be group oriented. They have more social interests. You know, I see that in my own family. Some of us have more social interest than others. You know, now during this situation that we have where, you know, this pandemic where you know, they've been told that we shouldn't be interacting too much with people or seeing people so much. We have Zoom meetings, you know, so I can see my family, we can see each other, friends and family. And there's some that will show up at those Zoom meetings and after 5 minutes, they're gone. They don't take too much of an interest. Or they might pop in there once and then not at all. You know, we've been having them for months. They don't have that much social interest. Yeah, they do care about their family members. They would like to see them and would like to spend time with them. But a Zoom meeting where you just talk and do that, they don't really care. So they care, I'm saying, but they don't care that much. The people who have social interest have more of that community feeling. Okay, they care more about others. They want to be with others. They want to help others, interact with others. And that's a very useful thing to have, very thing that's good for people themselves and for society. According to Adler, neurosis, things like where people are very mean and vindictive, or the evils that we see in our society, like racial hatred, drunkenness, are due to that lack of community feeling, where people basically care too much about themselves and not enough about others. A lot of people have said that, you know, with what's going on and stuff, with all the, you know, riots and demonstrations that there has been about, you know, basically about racial profiling and, you know, the type of policing that we've had, you know, they say that is a very bad form of policing, where the police or the people running the departments don't have enough social interest, that there's too much of a focus on just punishing people and beating people and incarcerating people and killing people rather than helping people. It says, at least I see on the police cars here, and you know, I've seen in LA, and I think it's still LA County over here where we live. It says to protect and serve. Okay, but I think there's too much of a focus on just enforcement, too much of a focus just on punishment, and you can see how some people are mistreated more than others. If you don't believe that, I think you're in denial. But these evils, according to Adler, are due to this lack of community feeling. Police should approach communities as something that they're a part of, not something to be punished, but that they should go into these communities and they need to get to know the people there. And that, you know, they basically need to know who's there, who lives there, you know, and become friendly with those people and interact with them, host barbecues, get-togethers, where you get to interact with the police and meet them, learn who your fellow policemen are who patrol that area. And if you did that, you would know the people and you would know how to better serve them, how to better help them, rather than just shooting them when they start acting in some way that you don't like. The problem is, you know, with policing is that if you resist arrest or if you don't like what's going on, is that often they'll just shoot and kill you. And they always shoot to kill. That's a problem. We need to have more of a community type of thing. It's called community policing, which a lot of people have talked about, where the police, where you have to have police who live in the community, part of that community, who know their neighbors and they know the people there. And if they had that connection, it would be a different kind of policing and not the kind of policing that we see. And you probably do have that kind of policing in some communities. But as you can see, there's a very big problem with policing and communities of color and communities where there are Black people, or, you know, or even brown people, so to speak, Latinos, or poor communities, where it's the approach there is different we need more social interest. We need a different approach. That's what some people say. And some people argue about this and say, no, we can't have that with policing. The police have a job to do, and they cannot be all friendly and chummy with the people that they're supposed to be policing. And they disagree with that. But Adler said, no, you need to be the socially useful. You need to have more social interest. And if you did that, you took more of an interest in people and sought to take care of each other, more than just punishing and competing with each other, then you'd have a different society. That's the socially useful type. And a lot of us are not that way, according to Adler, or we don't have enough of that. I want to point out, by the way, that it's not that you're one or the other, okay? Because the three forms that we talked about, the dominant, the getting, the avoiding type are all unhealthy. This is the only healthy style of life. But we all have a unique pattern. So we have a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and we all have a unique pattern, so to speak. We might have mostly this, or mostly the dominant type, or whatever it is. We all have our own unique pattern. I think I have a little bit of the socially useful type in me, but not as much as I should, because I'm also a little bit of the avoiding type. I'd like to avoid trouble, when I can, and just avoid the problems. Yeah, I have a little bit of the getting type in me. I want things, I want to achieve things. And the dominant type, I could be a little bit like that, but not that much. I think that's probably the weakest thing in me. Yeah, we all want things. We all avoid things at times. And sometimes we're socially useful. It's bad if you're just one or the, socially useful is good. But the other three, if you're just purely one or the other, it's bad, okay? But we all have a unique pattern. It's a percentage of this or that. And that's the way our personality is, according to Adler. So here's the thing. Where does our style of life come from? We said this before, but it's basically those early experiences with the mother, according to Adler, are the most important for developing social interest. It is your interactions with the mother. If she does a good job, right, I'm taking care of you, that you will develop social interest. The mother will teach the child cooperation, companionship, the courage to cope with life, will teach the child that people are good and you should cooperate and work with others and you can trust them. That's where it comes from, according to Adler. That's where a style of life comes from. But of course, children can learn other things as well. And even when they do learn this, they're usually not purely just the socially useful type. They can also learn other things, like how to get things, how to avoid things, and how to be dominant, to basically get other things as well. So, that's where our style of life comes from, those early experiences with the mother. You know what? I am going to stop there so we can start discussion, because the next part takes us into something that, though related to Adler's theory, will take us more time to get through. And I don't want to start it and stop in the middle. So I am going to stop recording.